Hello, and welcome to CubeCast, a new and original podcast show. I'm your host, Soroush, and this is my passion project. Please join me in going behind the scenes in the healthcare industry, where I invite notable and reputable doctors, therapists, and professionals, experts in their field, where we talk about their past and they tell us their original stories. This is an opportunity for us to learn about their ups and downs, their dedication, their hard work, and most importantly, what their advice is for the next generation. I think this is a very valuable tool for us to have to be able to learn from their success stories, and certainly it applies to the next generation and even our own success going forward into the future. This is a passion project of mine, and I want to be able to put on spotlight these career choices and be able to pave the way to the next generation. Throughout the weeks and months and over the past few years, 12, 13 years that I've been a practitioner, a clinician, I've had so many students come and talk with me and, try to pick my brain or try to come and observe and, learn a little bit about the career that I have chosen, chiropractor. But at the same time, just to pick my brain about my career choices and, what led up to me to become a business owner and a chiropractor. And sometimes we go grab a coffee, but at the same time, these are, just a few moments of my time and maybe other doctors or practitioners' times that, young adults or teenagers might have to be able to make some of these tough decisions. And these are tough decisions to be able to make a career choice. And a lot of these tough and stressful moments and decisions have to be made when you're a teenager or you're a young adult. It's a difficult one because it paves the way for your career, for your life, your friendships, the sacrifices you have to do, your relationships, your financial situation. So this is certainly something that I felt when I was younger, and I remember the stresses. But most importantly, it's also whether it's the right career choice or not. A lot of these paths are very, time-consuming, and it requires a lot of dedication and sacrifice. And, sometimes making them when you're young and you're a young adult or a teenager is very difficult, but you have to make them. And sometimes when you go into this path or in this direction, it's hard to go back. But, hopefully it's the right one, and is it the right one or not? But I certainly can relate when I was a teenager myself. Being 15, 16 years old and wanting to make this decision, wanting to become some sort of a doctor and be in the healthcare field. And I remember that anxiety that I had and the stress and not knowing, how to get there. Is it the right choice for me? And it's interesting because a lot of these decisions and choices are not just, your own choices. Sometimes it's what your parents want, or, in some cultures, it's cultural expectations. So there's a lot of these situations as well where that gives you a lot of stress. So if I go back in time about 25, 26 years ago, I would like to tell you a story about myself, when I was in grade 9 and 10 and, wanting to always become some sort of a doctor, but didn't know what kind of a doctor. And I think family medicine is usually the first thing that comes to anyone's mind. And so I remember when I was, in grade 10, this is 1997, 1998, by the way. And I remember I went to my family doctor and I asked him, if he would be willing to come and speak in our school. It had a grade 10 class. It was a career class. I can't remember what the name of it was called, but it was basically about figuring out a career and bringing people and professionals that you thought would give some sort of a background about what it takes to have that profession. So I want to be a doctor. I want to ask my family doctor, and very graciously he came to my grade 10 class, middle of the day, took 2 or 3 hours of his time, and came and spoke about what it really took to become a doctor, a family doctor. And so at that moment, I was very thankful, but I think it took a few years for me to really appreciate that, service and that dedication that he, gave me. And, right now that I'm a clinician, I'm busy. If someone comes and asks me, hey, can you take 3-4 hours your busy day to come to school and talk to my friends about your profession, it's very difficult. But over the years, that resonated with me, and it's really left an impact, on me. And it's really, made me think that it's such an important thing to be able to give back to the next generation. And these moments where you help someone, and for me at that moment, I was a young kid. But now that I'm clinician, I understand how difficult it was, and I really appreciate and respect that. I've been trying to, give that back to the next generation. So I never say no to any of the students that come and want to observe or want to, pick my brain to go for coffee. And that has landed us here with this show. This is the reason that this show started. It's an opportunity for me to invite these professionals on the show and pick their brain and really, see what it took for them, their ups and downs, for them to get into this profession and their, the profession that they're at, and, help to pave the way for the next generation. And that's why this is a passion project, and I'm, paying that forward. So fast forward 25, 26 years later, this is what I've started. And this is episode number 1. It's extra special for me, one, because it's the first of the channel that we've started and the program that I've started. But most importantly is because of the guests that I have. So that same doctor, family doctor that came to my grade 10 class is my first guest 6 years later. And it's an honor for me to have him here. And this is one of those moments of my life that defines my career, of having him here. And, so without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Michael Cates. Michael, thank you so much for coming to my show 26 years later. After coming to my grade 10 class. So it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
I can't believe it's 26 years. I'm older than I think I am, I guess. I mean, that's a long time
so
ago.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming.
No, it's my pleasure.
So Michael Cates, he's been in family medicine for 46 years. He's currently retired, but he's been very involved in the community as well. I think for the 10 or 11 years, you also were the medical coordinator and a doctor for the VanOpen Tennis Tournament. That's as right. Well. And over the years, he's probably written so many reference letters for me and connected me to so many people. So I'm very grateful. It's an honor to have you. Thank you so much.
Great to be here, Soroush.
Thank you so much. So Michael, maybe tell us a little bit about your background and how many years you were in practice and how you were involved.
Well, my parents named me Michael Dennis Cates. So that, if you just put the initials, it's M.D. Cates.
Oh.
So I became M.D. Cates, M.D. So there was always that, they didn't push me into it, but under the surface, I know they wanted me to become a physician.
Yeah.
I think my father he always said that he wanted to be a physician, and the war ruled that out. He was in World War II, and it never happened for him. So I started university. Well, I grew up in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. I went to UBC. I started a science degree, and along the way, I became interested in marine biology. I took up scuba diving, and I thought, boy, I'd like to be a marine biologist.
Wow.
And I came home, discussed it with my father, and he said, well, what will you do? Will you get a job? Are there lots of jobs for marine biologists? Will you work in an aquarium? And he just indirectly pushed me away from it. So I decided I'd apply to medical school. Now, back then, you could apply after third year. Mm-hmm. So at the end of my third year, I applied to the medical school. I only applied to UBC. I didn't apply anywhere else.
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd even get in. I mean, I had decent marks, but they weren't great. Mm-hmm. And when I look at kids today, the marks I had, probably they wouldn't even give me an interview.
It's gotten tougher over the years.
It's gotten way tougher. Anyhow, I had an interview with the assistant dean. It lasted about a half an hour. The next thing I know, I get a letter saying that I'm offered a position in the next class.
Wow.
So this was 1969.
Wow. I was not born by then.
No, you weren't. So I started medical school, and the first, it was tough.
Mm-hmm.
It was really tough. I kind of cruised through my undergraduate studies.
Mm-hmm. It's different, right? When you get to grad school.
Oh, it's very different. So the first 2 years were a bit of a shock, but I got through them. In the first 2 years, you do basic sciences. You do actually you start with the dental students. I think they still do that even.
Mm-hmm.
So you spend the first year and a half with the dental students, and you take the same courses.
It's the same common classes for chemistry or like general sciences and
that's right.
Anatomy and all that kind of stuff.
And I made some good friends, and I enjoyed it. But they were all very, very competitive, and they were so driven.
Yeah.
Even back then, I didn't spend my life in the library. They did. They said, "Well, what did you do yesterday?" And I said, "Oh, it was a beautiful weekend. I went skiing up at Grouse."
Mm-hmm.
And you went skiing? And I said, "Yeah, I did." and then I started to think, is there something wrong with me? They're in the library 8-10 hours a day, and I went skiing. So when I got into, then we got into third year, which is where you really start the clinical
side of things.
And that I enjoyed much more because we split into groups. There wasn't that sense of competition, who's studying more, who's
getting the better grades.
Better grades, So I really enjoyed that. But it was still quite difficult.
Yeah.
At the end of third year, I started to have second thoughts.
Oh, really?
I really did. I became a bit, is this really right for me? Can I work this hard and continue to do this?
Yeah.
So I actually skipped classes for a couple of days. And there was a man who I owe a lot to. I was actually in his, it was a rotation through psychiatry. And his name was Jim Miles, Dr. Jim Miles.
Mm-hmm.
And he noticed that I skipped out for a couple of days. So he asked me if I wanted to have lunch with him. He just called and said, let's just have lunch.
That's pretty cool.
So I still remember we went to a restaurant on 4th Avenue, and we had lunch, and he talked to me, and he told me that he had the same feelings when he was at the same stage.
Medical school, yeah.
And he convinced me to just carry on, to see the year out and see how I did. So I finished that year, did my 4th year, and it went smoothly. I graduated.
Mm-hmm.
That was a terrific day. I was more proud for my parents than I was myself.
Yeah, you became MD.
Because suddenly I'm Dr. Cates, and I remember standing in line. It was a beautiful afternoon.
Yeah.
This was 1973, and my parents were so proud. My dad had a suit made for me.
Yeah, it's a big achievement, yeah.
So, and then in the meantime, I'd applied for in those days, when you finished medicine, you just did a 1-year rotating internship.
Okay.
And I think they've made a mistake in not continuing that.
Oh, they've taken it out. Yeah, I think
now you have
residency,
you do a residency right away.
Yeah.
You have to decide: are you going to do family medicine? Are you going to do surgery? Are you going to do? And you start a residency. And
so you think that's better to have that, right?
I do, and they're talking about re-implementing it in some fashion. Anyhow, I didn't want to stay in Vancouver. I'd spent my 4th year at VGH. When you're in 4th year, you're seeing patients, you're on call.
Yeah.
And I found the doctor's residence it was like a prison. And so
it's tough.
So I decided I'm going to go away. And I lived at home right through medical school. I didn't live on campus. And so I'd always lived at home. So in those days, people either stayed here, they went somewhere else in Canada, but two popular places were New Zealand and California, maybe because of the climate. So
Definitely California for sure, the climate, right?
So I decided, well, I had some family in California, so I decided to go to California. So I went to, so I applied and I got accepted at a hospital there in Long Beach, California.
But what was your license? Can you like transfer it over?
Well, you're an intern. You don't have a license.
Oh, I see.
You just
right.
work in the hospital.
Yeah. Oh, because of the internship.
So
yes.
So I didn't know what kind of medicine I was going to do eventually. Yeah. But while I was there, I became very friendly with an anesthetist. And I thought, well, anesthesiology would be a good way to go. He said it was a terrific lifestyle. You don't have to run an office. You work in the hospital. You start early in the morning. Unless you're on call that evening, you finish at 3:30 in the afternoon, 4 o'clock when the elective surgeries are done. And I was young.
Yeah.
And I was actually very young because I had a December. I'm digressing here, but I had a December birthday. So I finished high school when I was 17.
17, yeah.
And so I was quite young. I was
so 3 years of undergrad and then 4 years of medicine. So you're probably like 24, right?
Yeah, so I was young. And I was impressionable, like all young. I was single, 24 years old. He lived on the beach. He was a surfer. And I thought, oh, what a life.
Wow.
So I decided, well, I think that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So I finished my 1 year of internship. I came back because I had to leave.
Yeah.
So I came back to Vancouver, and I decided I'd do they call them locums, where you look after somebody's practice while they're on holiday. So my first locum was actually for my family doctor. Mm-hmm. And his name was Leon Bard, and it was at Lionsgate Hospital.
Yeah.
And I spent 3 weeks in his office, and then I did this for about a year, almost about a year and a half, I guess. And I enjoyed it. I remember delivering my first baby in his practice.
Wow. Wow.
And, in those days, the family doctors did all the primary obstetrics.
Really?
Yeah.
So in the office?
Well, not in the hospital.
At the hospital. Sorry. Yeah.
So I remember I'd done quite a few deliveries when I was interning and as a medical student, but I remember being so frightened and I was just terrified. Here I am now. The buck stops with me. Mm-hmm. I didn't have anybody looking over my shoulder.
A lot of responsibility on your shoulder, right?
But it went smoothly, and it was just a very positive feeling. So I really enjoyed that. So I did that for about a year and a half. In the meantime, I still thought I'd do anesthesia. Mm-hmm. So I applied for different programs. And I wanted to stay in the Northwest.
Yeah.
So there was a very good program in Seattle. It was the Virginia Mason Medical Clinic. And they were well known for regional anesthesia, where they did nerve blocks. For instance, if they were operating on an arm
or something,
they'd do a nerve block. So I started there. I quickly started to miss the one-on-one with patients. Mm-hmm.
Doing like that internship that you did at the hospital,
well,
right?
Yeah, when you're doing anesthesia, you meet them in the morning.
Yeah.
You know what their surgery is going to be. You have a brief chat with them. You either put them to sleep, even if they're having regional anesthesia, you kind of sedate them. The surgery's over. And then you have to deal with the surgeons too, and the surgeons can be hard to deal with. They're very demanding. And And then, so I did this for a year, and then then it became time to do the second year. And halfway through, I had a case that lasted 4 hours.
Okay.
And I sat there for 4 hours. It was a difficult surgery. And then I remember sitting there saying to myself, can you do this for the next 30 years?
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't interact with the patients.
Yeah. So it's a defining moment for you. Where
It
like,
was.
is
It
this
was that one case, and I said, you know what? I went and spoke to the head of the department, and I apologized, and I said, I don't think this is for me. So I came back to Vancouver, and I was going to do locums again.
Yeah.
And then it was perfect timing. A doctor who I had done a locum for previously had a disaster. His house burned down.
Okay.
He and his wife lost everything, all their photograph albums, everything.
Oh, wow.
I remember him calling me and saying they just wanted to go back to Toronto
Yeah.
and start over. He said, would you like to take over my practice? And at that time, we were located on 15th and Lonsdale.
Okay. Right here.
Yeah,
15 London.
on the other side. And I said, sure. So that was September of 76.
Mm-hmm.
So I started there, and when I was initially there was an older physician, Paul Watson was his name. He was about 10, 12 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
There was another physician who had actually been a classmate of mine at med school.
Mm-hmm.
And so the three of us were there for about 6 months. Then he decided he'd go on and do gastroenterology.
Yeah.
So we had to get a third person. So an Irish doctor by the name of Dr. Quirk came.
I know Dr. Corr.
Yeah, and he joined us. And we had 35 years together. The three of us never had a conflict. It was a perfect. It ran smoothly.
That's rare.
Not very rare.
Yeah.
And it was terrific. Dr. Watson then retired. I'm just fast forwarding here. Dr. Watson retired, and then when he left, Dr. Quirk in the meantime had started doing chiropractic medicine, which was always his kind of first love. And he divided his time. He did part-time in our office, part-time in a chiropractic clinic. And then he decided that when Paul left, he'd go too. Mm-hmm. So then here I was by myself.
35 years later,
Yeah.
huh?
So I moved to the Westview Shopping Center.
Yes,
and there I practiced for another 10 years or so.
Wow.
And that's my career.
That's your career, yeah. In a small nutshell, right? No, it's a very amazing story. But I think we'll come back to some of those defining moments and milestones. But I think before anything, I want to get into kind of a bit of description of what it is in a day-to-day life of a family physician. You know, a lot of us obviously have some ideas of, going to see a family doctor, and, they see so many different cases, and, they're kind of the person that,
Okay, well, the first thing I want to say to you is that it's very different now than when I started. I don't want to make it, you know how older people always say, oh, in my day.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. But I want to say for the first 20 years of my practice, when Dr. Quirk and I get together, we say those were the golden years. We worked in the hospital. Mm-hmm. We worked in our practice. We'd start the day by going into the hospital and seeing our patients on the different wards. We'd wander to the different wards. We might have 3 or 4 patients in the hospital. Some of them were under the care of specialists. We'd visit them. We'd meet the specialists, talk about what the plan was.
Wow.
And we'd usually get to the hospital at about 7:45 in the morning. Mm-hmm. And then our office usually started at 9:30. Lionsgate Hospital was it was a small community hospital. It had there was a great sense of community there. We'd always meet in the surgical lounge after we made our rounds. The specialists would be sitting there. The GPs would be sitting there. We'd drink our coffee. We'd talk about patients. It was a wonderful atmosphere.
Wow.
We'd then head back to our offices.
Yeah.
As a GP, your day is busy because you set aside usually about 15 minutes for the average patient, unless they're there for a physical or they're there for counseling, then you give them more time. So you have to keep up, and it gets stressful. You're going boom, boom, boom. So right away I decided, and this was just my personal way of surviving.
Preference, yeah.
I always said I'm going to take an hour for lunch, but I didn't eat lunch. I actually ate my lunch after, in between patients. I'd go for an hour and exercise.
In the middle of your day?
In the middle of my day.
Wow. What kind of exercise? Like, what did you do?
I'd either go for a run, and then
Wow.
if I ran near the hospital, and my office was near the hospital.
Yeah.
There were showers at the hospital. Or I'd go to a gym. There was a local gym several blocks away, and I'd go there and exercise if the weather was bad. And
Wow.
I did this religiously for most of my career.
Wow, that's amazing. Like middle of the day.
In the middle of the day. Now, there were other doctors that did it too.
Yeah.
Most didn't, but I did. And then I found that really refreshed me for the afternoon. I'd come back.
Of course, yeah.
And sometimes I'd be a bit late. But
I'm sure that happened a lot.
it happened a lot. My receptionist would give me a dirty look, but
Hey, you're not doing well with the stereotype of doctors running behind, right?
well, yes, you invited me here. Anyway, but my days were usually very rewarding. I'd see my obstetrical patients, and I'd follow them through their pregnancies. I saw kids. I saw elderly people. It was a wide range. And, as a family doctor, you see musculoskeletal things. Back pain is one of the common. You deal with back.
Yeah.
Back pain is one of the commonest things we see. You see dermatology.
Yeah.
Then you see people with acute abdominal pain. You never know. People come in with acute chest pain. They're short of breath. And you have to make a decision.
Exactly.
And those decisions have to be made quickly. And you can't send everybody that comes in with chest pain and say, "Oh, they got to go to emergency." You've got to decide: is this significant or isn't it? But this was a challenge, and it was very rewarding.
So I guess there was always something different. I think that's like
Every
something
day.
that
Every day was
stimulated you
different.
more than probably anything.
Yeah, every day was different.
You never know what comes to the
And
door.
I
right?
never looked back and said, "Boy, I wish I'd continued with anesthesia." You even got to do minor surgeries. You'd remove bumps and lumps, and you'd go to the hospital and assist the surgeons. That was in my day.
They don't do that anymore right now, right?
No,
Yeah, it's changed.
if one of your patients needed a hip replacement or a bowel resection for bowel cancer, you went, you sent them to the specialist. Then when the surgery came due, the surgeon would call you and say, "Would you like to assist me?" And not always. Sometimes if it conflicted with something else, I couldn't do it. But generally, I did. And that was very rewarding.
That's amazing.
And then you'd see them post-operatively, and you'd follow them with the surgeon. And so when I say it was the golden years of medicine, I really think it was.
Because of the way that family medicine would go to the hospital.
You'd work in the hospital. Then slowly over time, I don't know where you want me to go with this, but
No, just this is. I think this is a very because it's actually one of my questions. Like, why do you think it went that way? And obviously, I think when you have family medicine in terms of like being the gatekeeper, it makes sense that they have the hospital visits. You
Exactly.
do that and have that one-on-one discussion with the specialist. But now it seems like everything is like so separate.
It's changed. And,
Yeah.
let's talk about obstetrics, for instance. You never knew when someone was going to go into labor.
Yeah.
So if they went into labor at 10 in the morning,
Yeah.
the hospital would tell you so-and-so is here, they're
Exactly.
in labor. And then you'd talk to them on the phone. Maybe at lunchtime you'd go visit them. I wouldn't go to the gym then. I'd
Of
go
course,
see
yeah.
them.
You won't be late for that
then,
one.
and then suddenly they'd call you and say, "Doctor, your patient's ready to deliver. You've got to come to the hospital." In the meantime, you've got 5 or 6 people in the waiting room.
Oh, yeah.
Fortunately, I had 2 partners who would say, "Oh, we'll look after them."
Mm-hmm.
And so you'd run to the hospital, you'd deliver the baby, then you'd come back and you'd see the rest of your patients. So it was difficult, but it was exciting and it was
Very rewarding, gratifying. Yeah.
Sometimes you'd get, often babies come in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And there were many nights where I'd be driving to Lionsgate Hospital at 2 in the morning and, and then you'd hopefully they usually call you unless there's something wrong, they usually call you when it's time for the mother to deliver the baby. But then by the time you delivered the baby and settled everything, I'd be driving home at 4 in the morning and then thinking, oh, I've got an office that I've got to be at the hospital at 8.
And then, yeah.
So it was tough, but it was wonderful. It was rewarding. We'd all, as family doctors in those days at Lionsgate, they had 1 or 2 full-time emergency physicians, but generally you went to the hospital when your patients were in emergency. They'd call you
To go and
you'd
help.
go see them.
Yeah, you go see them.
As the years went by,
How did this change? Like, why is
well,
this because
I guess it wasn't that efficient. I think they needed to have full-time emergency physicians there because Lionsgate became very busy. And a lot of patients didn't have doctors. So they had to have full-time emergency physicians. Then as the years went by, it changed even more. They decided that they should have hospitalists working full-time in the hospital. They thought it would be more efficient, I suppose, than having the family doctors there. So if someone was admitted who didn't have a doctor, a hospitalist would look after them. Then as time went by, we became a little frustrated. I did, and a lot of my colleagues did, because when we'd also be on call at night, and we'd often get called in the middle of the night. If a surgeon operated on someone, and then in the middle of the night they developed shortness of breath or chest pain, they'd call the family doctor on call to come and see them and assess them. In the meantime, specialists started to get paid for being on call. But they didn't pay the family doctors to be on call.
Oh, really?
No,
Why not?
They just didn't. They thought that we were being called for our own patients. That was
Oh,
the
because
excuse
you're
they
already
gave.
getting paid for the patients when you were seeing them on your...
Well, you're not being paid to see them at night.
Yeah, but because you were patients...
They were our patients.
Yeah.
So we became...
That's not cool.
we became frustrated by that. And I won't mention any names, but I got a call one night from a nurse because the orthopedic surgeon who was going to do a hip replacement the next morning had ordered a blood test. And she was on anticoagulants for atrial fibrillation. And the blood test came back showing that she was still anticoagulated, so they couldn't operate on her. And without giving her some medication. And this was like 11 o'clock at night. They called me. And I said, and I didn't even know the woman because I was in a call group. She wasn't my patient. And I said, well, why are you calling me? I didn't order the test. And I'll never forget, the nurse said, oh, well, I won't mention his name.
Yeah. Do you remember the name though?
Oh, yes. Of course I remember. He doesn't like to be called after 11 o'clock at night.
Oh, really?
And then I made the decision, okay, I'm not going to practice in the hospital anymore. I just didn't. And
Another defining moment, huh?
That was one defining moment. And a lot of us felt the same way. So a lot of us stopped.
Really?
Yeah, working in the hospital. There were still some that stayed,
course,
and I admire them.
And I guess over time, as that happens more and more, it just kind of like separates that, right? Like,
Well, it has. I don't know how many of the current family physicians still see their own patients in the hospital. Very few, I would think. Hospitalists do most of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. So I guess over time, maybe the population grows, hospitals become more filled.
They're very busy.
Things change, right?
The hospitals are overcrowded.
Yeah.
The emergency rooms are overcrowded. You're being rushed to get people out of the hospital more quickly.
Yeah.
Because they need the beds. So when I say I practiced in the golden years, I really did.
Was golden years, yeah.
I really did. I'm not saying people shouldn't go into family medicine. I think they should. But family medicine is different now than when I practiced. Very few do the obstetrics anymore.
Yeah.
Obstetrics is now done by family doctors, but that's all they do basically. Well, they do it part-time. There's, for instance, at Lionsgate, it's the Lionsgate Maternity Clinic.
Yeah.
And there's a group of, 6 or 7 of them. And all the family doctors refer their patients to them.
That they do specialize in
and
that
that's
specific,
what they do.
Yeah. So, fast forwarding a little bit, what year did you retire?
When I was 70 years old, I decided it's time to quit my full-time practice, which is where I used to see you and your family.
Exactly.
And but I didn't want to stop completely. So I decided I'd continue to work. I invested in one of the walk-in clinics. Yeah. So I decided I'd still work, 3 or 4 days a week, but only half days, because in the walk-in clinics you do a half day.
Yeah.
So that was 2015. So I did that for 4 years. I started with 4 half days a week, then I went to 3 half days a week.
Yeah, it was getting more and more difficult to see you, I remember.
And then when I got to 2 half days a week, by now I'm 70, I was 72 years old.
Yeah.
I started to think, it was getting more difficult to keep up. You have to keep up.
Yeah,
Medicine
changes
so quickly.
Research and all that.
There's new medications coming on the market all the time, and as you get older, it's harder to keep up. And I was starting to enjoy my time away from work.
Exactly. You're playing too much tennis, I remember.
Yeah, tennis was important, and so in December of 2019, I was driving to the clinic one morning. It was October. It was a beautiful day. Yeah. And I said, why am I still doing this? I've done it long enough. And I told them I was going to quit in December. And then, as you know, in January or February, COVID hit.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So I packed it in at the right time.
Right time and everything. So when you were practicing full time, how many patients were you seeing approximately per day, and how much time were you spending with each patient?
Well, I would tend to see, in order to make a living in my day, you had to see 25 patients at a minimum. So some doctors could see 40 patients a day, some even more. I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
That wasn't how I
40 is like 10, yeah. It's like,
so I would see an average about 30 patients a day.
Okay.
Now,
so a long day of,
So some days, you do them in 15-minute slots, but some patients would come in and they just need a blood pressure check, and a refill of a prescription. So that might only take 5 or 6 minutes. Some people would come in and it was a 15-minute appointment, but you end up spending half an hour with them. So it all balanced out in the end. But I enjoyed my one-on-one with the patients.
Yeah, you're a very personable guy. I remember.
I like to hear their
Yeah.
stories, where they went on their vacation, what they did,
I
how
remember, yeah.
So I wasn't able to do the high volume practice that some people can do. It would have stressed me out.
So a question for you that I think comes up a lot, and sometimes family medicine gets a bit criticized, again, not because of the fault of the doctors, but maybe the system as it gets busier and there's more patients that you have, is that over the 46 years that you practice, you've like pretty much seen it all, how it's grown.
Yeah.
Would you say that over time, family physicians are spending less time with their patients? I think that's one of the criticisms.
Yeah, they probably are.
Yeah.
And part of that is financial. Costs have gone up. The cost of running a practice has gone up. There's more paperwork now than there ever was when I started. You want to prescribe a certain medication for a patient you have to fill out forms. There was the medical legal things. Patients were in car accidents. The lawyers wanted letters from you. They would pile up. And I think family physicians, I was happy. I earned a decent living. But family physicians started to really fall behind. And in order to make a living, they had to see more patients.
Because the compensation wasn't being matched to the demand, right?
Now, fortunately, they've realized, so people stopped going into family medicine.
Yes, very true. It's become less,
which I think is sad. They decided they'd do a specialty of some type.
Yeah, because the billings are different, right?
They're higher paid.
Yeah.
Pediatricians and general and family doctors were always at the bottom of the pay scale. But the powers that be have realized that we have a shortage of family doctors now. There's 1 million people in BC that don't have a family doctor.
That's crazy, yeah.
My daughter lives in Victoria. She's been there 2.5 years. She can't find a family doctor. She's
They're all
got
fully
2 kids.
booked, yeah.
So they've decided that if they increase the compensation, they'll attract more into family medicine. Now that's going to take time,
of course,
to come to fruition.
And they just did that, I think, the beginning of this year, right?
Right.
They changed the fee schedule.
Hopefully, it's going to make a difference. Because I think family medicine is still a wonderful, wonderful choice as a career, and I would never talk anybody out of it.
Very interesting, because I think because of the pay and because of this level of stress and the fact that over the years you've been family medicine, you're seeing more and more and more patients. There's a lot of responsibility, that comes with it, and a lot of stress. And I think that's kind of taking away from, the appeal of it, right?
That's right. But hopefully that will change.
Yeah, because you guys are the gatekeepers of everything, and
it was a wonderful career. Don't get me wrong when I say these things. It was wonderful.
Absolutely.
You see people from birth. I delivered. It only happened once, but I actually delivered the baby of a woman who I had delivered as a young girl. And
wow! So 2 generations you delivered.
Yeah. So it was wonderful.
You must have some amazing stories.
There were elderly people that I saw through all their different phases of life, losing their spouses, helping them through that, helping them through terminal illness.
Wow, that's rewarding.
I have so many incredible memories. As I sit here, some of them flash back to me. I had a man, he was a Hungarian man. He was, I used to feel inadequate when he came into the office. He was so well educated. He had been a professor of literature, and he loved the arts. He loved music, and he'd talk to me about all these different parts of his life, and I really would feel inadequate around him. What had I done? I'd studied medicine.
Yeah.
Anyhow, he lost his wife. He developed a terminal illness, and I was with him when he died in his apartment, and I'll never forget it. I knew he was. They called me to see him. They didn't think he had much time left. He was sort of in and out of consciousness, and he asked me if I would turn on his music. So I turned on his music, and the sun shone through the blinds of his living room, and this beautiful glow of the setting sun came through, and it bathed him and the room, and I sat there with him, and I held his hand, and he passed away right then, and I was so glad that I had been there for him, and I was so it just came to me now as we're sitting here. I wanted to tell you about that.
That's such an amazing story.
Oh,
Wow.
it was incredible.
The moment, you're patient, and
it was just the rays of the sun coming in, the classical music playing on his stereo. It was beautiful, and
that's
I'll always
amazing.
remember that.
Wow, that's
So you basically, in family medicine, you see people from the pediatric stage right through. Look at you.
all the
Were you 13 when I first met you?
13 years old.
And I remember you growing up and all the different phases of your life, dealing with your family, and they're wonderful people, and your brother, and it was. So I did this with thousands of people.
Thousands of people, yeah. It's just
and
such
so
a,
that's why I would never, ever discourage anyone from going
from
into family medicine.
So one of the highlights of, being able to experience so many things, see so many people, help so many people. And
I think primary care is the foundation of our health system. And, now we've got nurse practitioners that they're starting to bring in. And that's a wonderful addition to family medicine.
That's right.
They've even got physician's assistants now. I'm not quite sure what their training is, but they come in. And so it allows the family doctor to see the more complex issues and let these people be the gateway for who should see them. And so it's changing, and I think it can still be a wonderful career.
Absolutely. And touching base on the fact that you mentioned some of the challenges that you mentioned, specifically one being time and, just seeing so many patients in a day. Would you say that it was one of your top challenges, in your practice?
It was.
Okay.
And some patients, you must see it in some patients are more difficult than others.
Yeah, very difficult,
it's hard to help them. And, you'd look at your list every day and you'd see a few names and you'd say, oh, I'm not sure I can help them. But and then when you'd see 4 or 5 of them in one day.
It can be tiring when you get home. Your mind is tired.
You're tired.
Yeah. But you are very optimistic. I feel like in your conversation that with the changes with the fee schedule,
that's going to help with the now that they're bringing in nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, and I'd like to see more of a team approach.
Yeah,
it would be nice if I think it is happening. For instance, it would have been great if Dr. Quirk had stayed in our practice.
Yeah.
And done his physical medicine. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there, and then did his chiropractic stuff, right? And then kind of a multidisciplinary approach, right?
And then maybe that's going to happen.
Yeah, it probably makes it makes it a lot easier for the patients, for the practitioners to be able to have that quick conversation instead of sending an email or telephone call, No, that's fine. Well, I'm very hopeful too, because I think that's one of the challenges we're facing in Canada and BC. With shortage of the family practitioners, but hopefully that'll draw more attraction to upcoming doctors and next generation to pursue family medicine. But going back to some of these defining moments and becoming a GP, and the reason I asked this question is because we had a very brief conversation over a lunch, I think, one time of wanting to become a doctor, right? And I guess you talked about how you went to undergrad wanting to become a marine biologist, and
Yes.
then your father kind of like
Well, he subtly pushed me away from
you
it.
into it.
I mean, I might have been happy doing that, but medicine was rewarding, and I think all branches of medicine can be rewarding. All branches of healthcare are rewarding. You're helping people,
Exactly.
and that is satisfying. There's no doubt about it.
But if your dad wasn't, kind of indirectly kind of putting that out there, would you have maybe pursued medicine? Tough question going back so
No,
many
at that
years.
point in time, I think I would have done marine biology.
Marine biology,
I think I would have. I loved scuba diving. I became fascinated with dolphins and whales, and I would have loved to have done research, and who knows where life would have taken me. But I chose medicine and I have no regrets.
No regrets
No
going
regrets.
back, right?
None.
Now, to the new generation of teenagers, young adults that want, that are thinking of becoming, pursuing medicine, and one being obviously family medicine. What kind of, I guess, challenges did you have? And also, I guess my question is, how hard was it? Because I think sometimes people see the glory of, successful doctor, and we talked about all the highlights, all the gratification, but the difficulty. And the reason I bring this up is not to say, oh, it's very difficult to become a doctor, which it is, it's a lot of hard work and dedication, but kind of like, what did you feel, when you're going?
Well, it was a bit overwhelming. Like I said, it was a bit overwhelming at first, and I started to have in third year. I started to have second thoughts, and I wouldn't say I became depressed, but I became anxious.
Yeah.
And I decided I said I need a few days off, so I didn't show up.
Yeah.
I just didn't show up. And then I got a call from Dr. Miles.
Yeah.
And he talked me through it, and I'm glad he did. I owe him. And I saw him a few times over the years. He's passed away now, and I always reminded him about that. And
that you helped me in that defining moment.
Yeah.
It's very nice of him that he pulled you aside and noticed you and took you to lunch. But
medicine is difficult. It's a challenge. The academic part of the first 2 years is very challenging, and then once you get into the hospital, you're facing different challenges. The thing about medicine today is that it's difficult to get into medical school.
It's extremely competitive, yeah.
I mean, like I said, my marks were, 85, 86%. I don't think you get in now with marks like that.
Yeah, difficult. And it's not just the marks. You have to have, hundreds of hours of volunteer work and have done research, even if you're not a researcher.
And you have to apply and reapply.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you'll get an interview. I
think it's less than 10% first time that you apply that you might even get an interview.
That's right. I don't know the exact statistics, but I wouldn't be surprised. And some people never get an interview, and I've met with them.
Very smart people, very educated.
They'd make fantastic physicians. I know they would.
Yeah.
But they couldn't even get an interview.
I know.
So it's difficult. If for a young person, if they really want to do it, they've got to try, and if they make it, fantastic.
So what kind of a person would you have to be to pursue medicine? The reason I ask this question is because culturally, sometimes, in some cultures, especially like the Iranian culture, for example, a lot of parents want their kids to be, either, a doctor, a a lawyer or an engineer, right? And a lot of kids, including myself, growing up, you're like, oh, I want to be a doctor, right? Like just from not even knowing, because everyone's always talking about it, the prestige, the title,
Yeah.
everything. And so obviously it's not for every person, not everyone can become a doctor. And it's, the character trait, personality has to match as well. So what would you say to the next generation? Like what kind of a person do you have to be to want to become a doctor?
Well, first of all, you've got to be someone who's dedicated. You have to be dedicated and be willing to put in the hours. You have to a lot of studying.
A lot.
And the
yes.
knowledge, I can't even imagine what medical school is like now. The breadth of knowledge is just expanding.
Exponentially, yeah.
So, number one, you have to be willing to put in those hours and that dedication. You also have to be someone, to be a physician, you have to be someone who can communicate and, more importantly, can listen. You have to be a listener.
Yes.
You gain more from listening to your patient and even just watching them.
Exactly.
Than you do from all the tests you might order. You really do. I mean that. Over the years, you become... My partner and I used to say, we know when someone is really sick.
Just the way you see, you hear, you observe.
Just by observing them.
Yeah.
And that takes time to develop. But you have to be someone who's observant and someone who can listen. You have to be able to listen.
Yeah, and be a people's person,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
you do.
Because you're seeing so many people every day.
And you have to have empathy. So those are the main characteristics. You have to be able to communicate as well.
That's right, yeah.
And if you have all those characteristics, then sure, go for it.
Medicine could be yours, right?
And you might not make it. But if you can't, become a nurse practitioner.
Yeah, pursue something in medicine, right?
You can or go into something else. Become a physiotherapist. I think nursing is a fantastic profession. I don't know whether you're going to interview any nurses, but
absolutely, yeah.
I think you should.
Absolutely, on the
Nurse
list.
practitioners.
It's a critical role in healthcare.
So, but if someone, I would never discourage anyone from pursuing a medical degree in medicine as a profession, and especially family medicine.
Yeah, you're making a good case for it. Yeah, the passion, I could just see.
I have no regrets at all. It's been wonderful.
Well, you've been a fantastic life. I remember you always asking me about hey, how's your brother doing? How's your mom doing? How's your dad? How's tennis, right? So it was also always awesome to have that conversation with you. But I think one of the parts of the job and the profession comes with a lot of stress as well, because obviously there's gratifications when you help people, cure them and find a solution for them for their health. But there's a lot of moments of high stress where so how do you or did you cope with stress? Obviously, you did the running in the middle of the day.
If I couldn't run, if something happened and I had a busy day, I'd go for a run when I got home. To me, I was a bit of a fitness nut.
You still are. You're still
I am. So a little bit obsessive compulsive about it, but that's all right. It kept me. It was an incredible release for me. And my advice to most physicians is you have to have some kind of balance in your life. I had 2 kids. Family life is important. If you neglect family life and you neglect your own health, it's a disaster waiting to happen. And I saw a lot of physicians break down early, and they burned out.
Yeah, because of the stress and not taking care of themselves, working long hours, right? And
you've got to put in the long hours, but you also have to balance it with family life. Family life is very important, and then your own personal time. For me, it was going for a run for a half an hour.
Yeah, always sports was
Yeah.
a major part of your playing
Yeah.
sport, like run, tennis.
Yeah.
You still play tennis, and so
And I still need to do it, even being retired. It's
your outlet.
it's an outlet for me, and
Yeah, I remember, all the tennis tournaments, my brother and I, with your son, Justin, we used
those
to
are
play
great
tournaments.
memories, great memories.
You're always like volunteering your time, weekends, being, the.
you still owe me another hit.
Yes, yes.
I've come here tonight.
You're supposed to go practice, and then. I know, but no, that was wonderful to see, because I think that also taught me a lesson, saying, like my family doctor is the person running the tennis tournament,
Yeah.
The junior tennis tournament. And
But
I know
it was
you
a
did-
week. It was a weekend. It was, I was.
But still,
But I enjoyed that. It was a great outlet. I loved the kids. It was wonderful. I did that for, I think, 11 straight years.
you've been a fantastic role model and a champion, of doing that and being involved in the community with the Vancouver Open as well,
Yeah.
the tennis tournament, and all the generations of kids and people that have come with sports, and obviously being your patients and now friends.
Look at Vasek Pospisil,
That's
the
right.
Davis Cup champion. I met Vasek at that tournament, and I became his family doctor.
That's right, and he's been friends with you,
Yeah.
family friends with you as
Yeah.
well over the years. Yeah, very rewarding, very rewarding. But it's amazing to see your dedication to your work and your passion, and I guess that kind of answers our last part of our podcast show. We always ask our guests a question: is if you go back in time, would you have pursued the same career? If yes, if no, what would you do differently? But if it's yes, what advice would you give to your younger self, young Michael Cates? How
Well,
would you do it differently?
Yes, I would have. I would have done the same thing. I was swayed by the, as a young man, seeing this anesthetist living the life,
the
with the
dream.
surfboard on the beach, and I think I was a bit young. If I had been a bit older, I might not have even. I didn't waste a year and a half, but it was
You had to
interesting.
gain the experience, yeah.
But I think I enjoyed the family medicine that I was exposed to, and I should have just gone right to it.
Do it a bit sooner.
Yeah, I have no regrets, and I'd recommend it to anybody.
Well, that's a fantastic way to finish. Michael, thank you so much for coming, and it's a
Been
pleasure.
a pleasure.
And,
Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Thank you.
All
Michael.
right, my friend.
Thank you so much.